In Minecraft 1.17, we're getting copper. The blessed day is upon us. You'd think a game about mining would have more than 2 metals, unless netherite counts. I guess it's more of an alloy. But hey, Minecraft, if a decade's what you need, then a decade it is. In fairness, the reason we don't get many ores is because, unlike blocks, everyone kind of expects ores to have some kind of use, and it's tricky to come up with something special. So subscribe if you like what you see. I will be your host, Simply Sark, and let's explore what Minecraft copper could actually do. First off, let's just line up all the ores and plop them into categories. This will give us a better idea on where we can squeeze copper in and make sure he stands out enough in the crowd. Coal is fuel, fair enough. Iron is for industrial stuff. Gold is for alchemy, high enchantability, rails, bartering and pickling reputation. Not bad gold. Diamond is actually kinda useless now you think about it. Lapis is for enchanting, redstone is extremely unique, emerald is a currency, quartz is a redstone fanboy, netherite is for fire resistance and anti-knockback. There are some cool uses here, but you can really see, because of Minecraft's narrow tech tree, a lot of these ores have to think outside of the box. They can't just force themselves in between iron and diamond or something, they have to go in some other direction. If you want to add copper to the game, it's going to have to do the same thing. So, what could copper do? If you know anything about real copper, you'll know it's an extremely conductive material. Seriously, I scoured Wikipedia pages about copper and this stuff is involved in practically everything you can think of. It's one of the most useful materials known to man. So it'd definitely be a shame if Minecraft didn't do it justice. Copper is clearly all about electricity and power, but the issue is, we already have something like that, redstone. And the thing with redstone is, technically, it breaks the laws of thermodynamics because it's basically an infinite power source. This throws a spanner into the works because the obvious thing for copper to do would be something sort of like redstone, electricity generation, logic, and powering machines or mechanisms like pistons, lamps, and dispensers. But people like redstone. Even if it doesn't make entire sense, people like the simplicity and accessibility of it, and tacking on this extra complicated system just so you can push a piston is gonna put a lot of people off. But that doesn't change the fact that copper and electricity are destined to team up. If you want to add a power system, you've got to make it its own thing. It can't step on the redstone system's toes too much, it's got to exist on its own plane and offer something different than what redstone does. So let's talk about that. I have 2 stages to this idea that I think would be great fun to play with even if you're not much of a technical player. The first thing we need to figure out is, what would this power system actually be used for? If it doesn't power redstone devices, what could it do instead? I think the best idea would be something that affects all players. If you took the average Joe player, what's something that's going to affect all of their experiences? Let me introduce you to the idea of charged armor. Now, if you've ever played the Fallout series, this idea is inspired by a feature in those games called power armor, and I think that concept could work really well for copper. Allow me to explain what charged armor is all about. In Minecraft, there is effectively a single skill tree you follow. You get wood, you get stone, then iron, then diamond, maybe netherite if you're feeling exotic, then you start enchanting. This is the basic foundation of how you start the game, then climb the skill tree to the end of the game. But what if there was another route you could take instead to climb from early game to end game? Enter charged armor. The idea here is that unlike other materials, copper could hold an electrical charge, so copper armor would probably be quite an early game set, but I think it would be a really cool idea if instead of your armor being made obsolete within an hour of getting it, like with leather and iron, your armor could actually strengthen in tandem with the player as you progress through the game. Now, in their default state, copper armor tools are pretty unnoteworthy, but like I said, these items can become charged, and it completely changes how they behave. When copper armor tools hold a current, they gain new abilities that strengthen the more and more power you channel into them. These charged abilities kind of act like a parallel to enchantment, because the copper set is unenchantable. Instead of leveling up through the game with XP, you level up with the ever-increasing power you're able to generate. The difference between charged abilities and enchantments, however, is that charged abilities are not permanent. Copper armor only stays charged for as long as you can feed it power. The stronger the ability, the more juice it consumes, and once the armor or tool runs out of energy, it deactivates and converts back to regular old boring armor. For example, a pick with a low charge could start out with a modest mine speed increase, but then a full power pick could go toe to toe with an efficiency 5 netherite pick. Perhaps it has an extra effect like being able to instantly smelt ores into ingots. Charged boots could give a slight speed increase to start with, then eventually perform boosted long jumps. Charged chest plates could increase your reach more and more as you power up. Charged swords could not only gain more attack damage, but full charge perhaps unlocks an arcing ability, sort of like an enhanced sweeping edge. I think these abilities should feel reminiscent of enchantments because they're supposed to be parallels, but also a little bit different at the same time. Some of you may be thinking this all feels a little overpowered. That's understandable because this system would work quite differently to what we used to. But allow me to explain how the actual power and charging mechanics work, and you might begin to see how this is a lot more reasonable than it first seems. So when I was brainstorming this, the theme I was thinking wasn't electricity armor, it was actually productivity armor. This armor would basically reward people who invested into their world and in return give them abilities that allowed them to be more productive around areas they've spent time building up. Like I said, the charged armor requires a constant source of power to maintain its strength and compete with other sets. So how do you charge it up? Well, there are basically two blocks, copper blocks and a power source block. The names don't really matter too much, but I was trying to make this as simple and straightforward as possible. There's a lot of mods that have power systems and machinery, but I wanted to strip this down to the very basics because I believe Minecraft works best when it's uncomplicated. There shouldn't be a dozen different components and specialist blocks, it should just be that clunky, what you see is what you get. The power block is basically just where the energy itself is stored, and the copper blocks are just used to connect everything together. Any copper block connected unbroken to the power block counts as part of a network. When a player with copper armor or tool makes contact with any block on the network, the power block begins to discharge and funnel the power into the player's armor. Very easy to understand. The player can break contact with the network and keep their charge, but it'll only last until they've run out of juice. While charged, the player will be able to do things like sprint and jump without consuming hunger, but this will eat into the armor's energy reserves. The more intense the activity, the more power that is needed. For example, that supercharged long jump I mentioned earlier would be one of the more power-hungry activities. So how do you actually generate power? Well, there's lots of ways you could approach this, but I thought a great way would be to link it to tasks you'd be doing around your base already. For instance, a furnace that successfully smelts an item and is making contact with the network would add power to the power block. The same could be said for the crafting table. When you craft an item, that counts as energy and is fed into the network. Or of course, this would need to blacklist some recipes that can be crafted and uncrafted endlessly. Similarly, a mob that dies either by fall damage or some other means while connected to the copper network would count as energy too. And the same could be said for sugarcane sprouting a new block, or even lightning strikes. These are all examples of destructive processes, and the reason I picked them is because they can only be done once, and also because these events are all linked with farms and productivity. It encourages people to build. The more farms you have, the more opportunities there are to take advantage of these energy events. The easier to access energy events like crafting would only yield a bit of energy, but the further you progress into the game, the more options would open up to harvest better energy events. In theory, you could charge up your armor to endgame levels as soon as you've built a network, but it would take a really long time and would get drained pretty much as soon as you perform a high energy task. For example, I was trying to think of what an endgame energy source would look like. Unlike the early game, I think these ones should be non-destructive, but expensive to access. That's when I got the idea of bringing netherite into the equation. Currently, netherite blocks are one of the most expensive things in the game, but they don't actually do anything really. What if we killed two birds with one stone here and tied netherite into this whole system? What if netherite was magnetic? Now don't quote me on this, seriously don't, but in the real world, from my understanding, the way you make electricity is more or less just passing magnetic stuff through coils. Whether it's wind power, coal, hydro or nuclear, it all basically comes down to that. The reason I like the idea of netherite being magnetic is because it's endgame, it sounds cool, and netherite is found in the molten core of the world. That is totally where a magnet would be. Not to mention the lodestone, which is made with netherite, pulls compasses towards it. Also, it could actually be kinda handy when you're mining it. What if ancient debris attracted items towards it? This would give you a hint on where it is if you almost exposed it. So, seeing as it's not doing anything else, let's say netherite blocks act more like sand and gravel and have gravity. If you drop this netherite block parallel to the copper network, this would generate a huge amount of energy for your system. If you think about it, a netherite block is really expensive. It's basically double the cost of upgrading diamond armor to netherite armor. That'll make this decidedly endgame and a fair counterpart to netherite armor. To reiterate my point, this charged armor would be designed for short distance use, i.e. not far from your network. You couldn't just run off into the sunset because you'd quickly run out of power. You can only use this in areas you've built up and developed. When supercharged, it may seem overpowered compared to other sets, but it can only be used locally. Also, to balance it a bit more, I thought it'd be a fun idea if charged armor reacted very badly with water. Maybe if you're only a little charged, it could wipe out the power and do a bit of damage, but if you're yielding this massive amount of voltage, perhaps water could become an extreme hazard. Maybe you could literally explode and disintegrate along with your inventory if you try to jump in the water. I like the idea of risk increasing as your power grows. It gives this concept strengths, but also weaknesses to not make it the be-all end-all and still let other sets remain viable. Now I actually want to expand a little on that netherite magnet idea, because I think it'd be cool if it could do a little bit more than just be a power source. What if you could actually create magnetic fields if you paired the copper power system and netherite together? Using some new cheaper netherite derivative, because real netherite would be far too expensive, you could build these loops. These loops could be customizable in size, kind of like nether portals. When connected to a copper network, and granted it has enough available energy, this would create a magnetic field. Maybe redstone could interact a little bit and flip the direction of the field if you gave any of the loop blocks a pulse. Maybe different kinds of armors are more or less vulnerable to the field. For example, netherite, being super magnetic, might mean players are able to be pulled and pushed at higher velocities than, say, iron. Diamond, being non-metal, would be invulnerable to the field, which could give it an edge over netherite depending on the scenario. But I think magnets would be extremely useful for branch mining. You know, when you're mining a huge area and there's loads of items lying around, you could create a magnetic field that drags them into a collection area instead of letting them despawn. But all of this is just one interpretation. I've tried to come up with something simple, fun, and unique enough that it can stand on its own feet. But with something like copper, you could take it in all kinds of different directions. However copper actually turns out, I hope it adds some interesting new mechanics to the game, whatever they might be. Either way, that's all we have time for today. This video was much longer than this originally, but I've had to cut out a lot, otherwise I would literally be here all day explaining the intricacies of this whole power system. I do hope you enjoyed though, and hopefully this was fun to think about and maybe even inspired something in your mind. But, as always, thanks for watching guys, I've been your host, Simply Sark, and I will see you next time.